Welcome back to Close Up. Foreign policy may not be issue number one in this Republican presidential primary, but it's still a crucial component of the debate, and some want to ensure it remains front and center as candidates descend on the Granite State this summer. This morning we have with us Morgan Ortagus of Polaris National Security, a former Trump administration State Department official. Ms. Ortagus, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be in the Granite State.
And great to be talking foreign policy as well, especially at a time when so many interesting things are happening in Russia. Help us make sense of this situation. I think a lot of people were watching this and saying, my goodness, it looks like a coup, and then suddenly Prigozhin backs off and flees the country. Was this just internal politics that spilled over into sort of international, incidents, or is this the beginning of the end for Putin, do you think?
Hopefully it's the beginning of the end. It's certainly a mess internally. So to sort of peel back and look at it from a 50,000-foot level, remember that a year and a half ago, Putin embarked on this campaign to invade his neighbor, a free and democratic state, because he wanted to, because he thought might equals right, and that he would be able to get away with this. He also thought that he would take Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine, in a few days, maybe a week. And here he is a year and a half later. We don't know the exact estimates, but we think at least 100,000 Russian soldiers have been lost on this battlefield. His army has been embarrassed on the world stage. I think whenever Putin met with Xi Jinping, the leader of the Chinese Party, sort of got that green light, I don't think he nor Xi Jinping thought that it would take a year and a half and that they would be on the back foot. I got to tell you, I was in Lviv, I was in Ukraine, May of 2022. We're in 23, yeah, so May of 22. And when I met with the Ukrainians, I thought, my word, they're going to fight to the last man, woman, and child. They're going to fight because they want to be free. And in this live free or die state, I think we can understand that feeling of wanting to fight for your country and fight to be free. So what happened last Friday didn't make a lot of sense to a lot of people watching. Essentially, you have this private mercenary army that are a group of incredibly bad guys. I mean, some of the worst human rights violations. I mean, they kill women, children, innocents. They're disgusting, disgusting individuals. Prigozhin, the head of this, is not any better than Putin, and he might even be worse in some ways. So these are not. There's sort of. It's sort of like when you're watching in Afghanistan and ISIS and the Taliban are fighting each other. You just root for both of their success, right? So that was some of what was going on last weekend. But without getting too in the weeds, essentially Putin's little mercenary army got a little big for their britches, got a little out of hand, and I think it was an embarrassment for Putin that for the first time in 23 years, there has been someone who has publicly attacked his position of authority and leadership. That hasn't happened in 23 years. The oligarchs, the human rights activists, the people in Russia that have tried to challenge Putin have always gone down in flames, and now you had someone that got like 150 miles from Moscow, from the capital. Huge embarrassment for Putin.
Let's transplant this into the context of this Republican presidential primary.
Yes.
Former President Trump has said he could end this whole thing with a phone call because he knows Putin and he knows Zelensky. Is that a little naive, though, given how entrenched the Ukrainians are in defending? The idea that they would just give up at this point seems a little bit of a stretch.
Well, I think it's important to remember that President Trump and Mike Pompeo, who was the Secretary of State, my boss, they understood the concept of deterrence. And remember, in our administration, we succeeded at deterrence. Like, Putin did not invade Ukraine. We saw that Putin invaded Georgia in the Bush administration. He invaded Crimea in the Obama administration, and there was really little consequences that they paid. And we were able to make sure that he did not take any more territorial expansion in the Trump administration. So I do think President Trump and his national security team get a lot of credit for arming the Ukrainians early. Remember, we were the first administration to arm the Ukrainians with defensive military weaponry. That had not happened before, and that was part of the reason, I think, that part of many reasons that we were able to deter Putin from invading. And why does that matter? Because we have to be honest, and this isn't a political statement, but the Biden administration failed at deterring Putin from invading Ukraine. That matters because we have to learn the lessons of deterrence failures so that we don't repeat it with Xi Jinping. Because if we don't deter Xi Jinping from invading Taiwan, we could be talking about thousands and thousands of loss of U.S. military personnel if that happens.
We'll circle back to Taiwan in a bit, but you talk about learning lessons. You're kind of jumping into the New Hampshire primary, not necessarily as a candidate, but as a foreign policy player, trying to get these candidates to talk more about the issue. Tell us about what you're doing with Polaris and how you want to shape sort of the foreign policy conversation in this primary?
Well, I got to tell you, I woke up this morning getting dressed to come here, and I thought, what a country we live in. I come from a working class family. My parents graduated from high school. They weren't able to go to college. My sisters and I were able to graduate from college. And I thought, you know, to go from just two generations ago, my grandfather only went to the 4th grade and fought at the Battle of the Bulge, and I get to interview presidential candidates in the Granite State. What a country we live in. So I am blessed with this opportunity. I am so passionate about foreign policy, about national security, and how and why it affects our everyday lives. You know, you said in your intro, well, foreign policy isn't really at the top of everyone's minds. And while I agree with that, I think my job as sort of an evangelist for national security issues is to show people in the Granite State, is to show all Americans why these foreign policy decisions and how these foreign policy decisions actually do affect their everyday lives. So we're starting with Nikki Haley. We hope to have more presidential candidates come through. Polaris National Security is my policy organization that I founded after the Trump administration, because I think on the Republican side, which I'm a part of, we should be having this debate about what is the right way to aid to the Ukrainians, if at all, right? That's a debate amongst the Republican Party. What is the right way to deter Xi Jinping? How do we prepare for a battle over Taiwan? How do we support our ally Israel? Is this Iran nuclear deal that the administration may be pursuing again, is that in America's interest? Is that in our friends and allies' interest? And ultimately, of course, the most important national security issue of our time is our undefended southern border, in which we see fentanyl that comes over from Mexico, kills thousands of Americans, and takes a lot of lives here in the Granite State.
There is this isolationist impulse in America. It's been there from the beginning, sure, and it's been reawakened, I think, in some ways by the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. From your perspective, you know, this is in both parties, but certainly the Republicans are having this conversation as well. Do you welcome that return of isolationism and that impulse, or is this something that you would like to see put back in its corner, I guess?
I always welcome a debate of policies and ideas, and I'm not afraid of a debate. In fact, I like it when people challenge and debate me. I would take the whole hour of your show doing so. So I don't think, I mean, isolationism is not how I view the world, but I do think that, or at least America's place in the world, I should say, but I do think it's incredibly important, as you pointed out, to understand why, in both parties, right, you could look at the far left and the far right, why we have these tendencies and how the political elite in Washington, D.C., which I do not live there, I live in Nashville, Tennessee, but the political elite in Washington, D.C. forget who fights and dies in their wars and what's in the best interest of the American people. I am very proud of the record under Mike Pompeo in the Trump administration that we did not seek to enter new wars. We didn't put new boots on the ground. But don't forget, there is a territorial caliphate of ISIS in Iraq and Syria whenever we came in. We had to destroy that territorial caliphate. We took out al-Baghdadi. We took out Soleimani, the world's largest terrorist in Iran. When we took him out whenever he was visiting Iraq, against sanctions, by the way. We got peace deals between Israel and the Arab states, the Abraham Accords. We released the Moab bomb in Afghanistan. So you could go through the list where we were not afraid, we were not scared to use military action if it was needed as a last resort. But we also weren't necessarily looking to go put 100,000 troops somewhere.
Getting back to Taiwan. If the Taiwanese don't take the same approach as the Ukrainians, again, fight to the death, defend their territory, does America really want to get involved if they're not all in?
You know, when I talked to Taiwanese leadership, I interviewed the Taiwanese representative in December at the Reagan Security Forum in California. Very, very determined leadership. I have been to Taiwan. I think they very much care about being a free people and being willing to fight for themselves. It is a Herculean effort. It is a, you know, whatever analogy you want to use, David and Goliath fight for sure. But it's not just about Taiwan. We also have to remember that there is this concept that we're all used to since the end of World War II, which is freedom of navigation, freedom of the seas. How do we get the cheap goods that we like so much in this country? Well, that's because commercial ships have free passageway in international waters around the world where they can transport them, right? The American economy is so dependent on the free seas, on the free international seas. Do you know that 97% of our penicillin comes from China? So we have to make sure, the U.S. Navy has to ensure that that international waters remain free, that ships are able to sail. Because if not, commerce, as we know it, would end overnight if the Chinese Communist Party decided that they could be in control of international waterways. We are talking about existential threats to our way of life, and that's why I want these Republican candidates to talk to me about it and to answer what they are going to do as president. Because what do we know? We know that our Pentagon says by 2027, Xi Jinping wants his military to be ready for an incursion over Taiwan. That's in the next presidency.
Well, we will continue this conversation as we see you out there on the trail with
Thank
all of
you.
these candidates in the months ahead. We appreciate your time, Ms. Ortegas, here on Close Up.
Thanks for having me.